Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, we'll be talking to Caitlin Cowan, a writer who lives on Michigan's West Coast with her husband, their young daughter, and two mischievous cats. She's the author of Happy Everything, coming in 2024 from Cornerstone Press. She's taught writing at UNT, Texas Women's University, and Interlochen Center for the Arts. Caitlin works in arts nonprofit administration for Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, where she serves as director of international programs as well as the chair of the creative writing program. Caitlin also serves as poetry co-editor at Pleiades and writes Pop Poetry, a weekly poetry and pop culture newsletter. Which honestly, if you have ever been sitting there watching TV and a poem gets read, or you think that someone just made an allusion to poetry, and you're like, did anybody else notice that? Did anybody else notice that? And all your friends are like, no, none of, what are you talking about? Caitlin noticed. Go subscribe to Pop Poetry. I'm telling you, you will not regret it. But before you run off and do that, sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Cowan, and I'm going to read some poems from my new book, Happy Everything. This is the title poem. Happy Everything. In Mama's nightmare, she's young again. Her wedding unfolds at the local McDonald's. The groom is her youngest brother, who carves a wizened pumpkin and mutters his snot-nosed vows. Christmas lights spatter the walls like buckshot. Her guests ransack cornucopias and tear at glittered valentines. They soap the windows. Happy everything. So much to celebrate. Here is Mama's horror. She the decorator, the spiker of punches and curler of ribbons. But when her hands petrify into gloves of pain, it is not a dream. The part where the parties end, where her husband leaves and takes the guests, is not, alas, the dream. She writes toasts for parlor ghosts, but thinks this is absurd. All the year's eruptions of joy and hello stuffed in one dumb night. The terror is the awful party inside the party, the one where no one's left. It's not the lost house she fears, or its dining room ablaze with brandy, the windows fogged with a turkey's steam. Instead, she sweats through the night under the threat of unlicked invitations, missed buttons at wedding feasts. Her bad dreams are the sounds of no one in her kitchen. Neighbors potlucking on her rotten deck, silent and swirling their sangria, wishing its whirlpool would drown them. When I told her my young marriage was over, we were awake. She could still taste the envelopes on her tongue. That poem first appeared in Up North Lit. The next poem I will read is called Happy Father's Day. How to crook a pinball, how to lose at chess. Daddy taught me how to air guitar and drum the back headrest. Cars, he wasn't much for. That was Granddad's thing. So Daddy wasn't there when I learned to break that spring. But I learned the word malingering, making up your pain. Daddy said his patients did it almost every day. Did I make this up, I thought, the night that I came home and found a pot of early peas pebbled on the floor? Does this really hurt, I thought, thumbing broken plates, or is this feeling just a hungry fake? I was quiet as I swept the shards into the trash, silent as the shush the man I married fed me with. Try to stop without a stutter. Try to stop without a sound. That's the trick that Granddad taught me, how the rubber kissed the ground. There are many poems in this book titled after holidays like that one. Birthdays, Halloween. There are several poems also dealing with, of course, marriage, like this one. It's in several parts. It's dedicated to my dear friend, Jenny, and written after Dorian Lau's amazing poem, After 12 Days of Rain. After 18 months of marriage. 1. The day after the wedding, we roamed Ann Arbor in party garb. He listened when I spoke. Sequins winked along my waist, and it felt like a new life. I said I'd always thought he was bad at driving, and he agreed. All honesty now possible, at least for a moment. He held my hand. In the quiet of a cellar bar, he called it his paw, his little white biscuit. Each day after that one was worse. The fights, the breathless panic, the lies, and paperback sex. After 18 months, it was over, but it felt like we'd been married for just one frozen day. My magic was used up. My fingertips sparked but refused to light, denied us their burst of rose-white vim. I couldn't make him happy. I couldn't even make dinner. The hearth I once tended could only sigh great breaths of cold snow. 2. I returned to the city where we met and married, and every bricked facade reminds me of him. The night he hoodwinked a cop into believing I was of age. The night he hood slid a whole block of cars in the new snow. Like childhood toys and most first kisses, he is more real in memory than he ever was in life. Back then, I knew I was too young for love, but fell in anyway. Would you rather look at 1,000 paintings for 1 second, I asked myself back then, or at one painting for a lifetime? I shoved quarters into the pinball machines that used to dazzle us. Remember his tight-lipped kisses, perfunctory as a finger pressed against a red button. 3. I drink at our old haunts, douse my debtor's heart. He would take pleasure in my pain if he knew. A little bird crying, told you so, told you so. But I keep going. I love and am loved again, wary as a feral cat that comes inside. Friends marry, and I am near. What else to do but toast and try? I noose the top pearl of my best friend's ivory gown, watch its tulle lift her above herself. Alabaster bird, little darling. She will leave him in 26 days, and somehow I already know. I grin and tell her she is perfect because we are our mother's daughters. She smiles right back, a vision. In addition to the many poems commemorating holidays and weddings and marriage, there are several poems in the book that I call registry poems, like a wedding registry. The poems take their name from objects, household objects, gifts. This one is called Life Height Pearl Handheld Crumb Sweeper. The epigraph is a description of the object. Sweeps up crumbs, dust, spilt ashtrays for tabletops, upholstery, and smooth or carpet surfaces. 3 bristle brushes, prize cover off to empty. After dinner, a good hostess will sweep the crumbs from her table. I'd seen Mama do it many times. Run the little white box over the tablecloth, let its 4 wheels and long bristles fling the dross into its chambers. I used to like looking at it later, the 2 neat rows of dinner in miniature, a sparrowgrass scale, 2 caviar eyes, the dust of croquembouche past. It made everything small, like memory. She sent it to me once I was married, still in its original box. Originally $15, she snagged it on clearance for $2.47. Handkehre, Ramasmiet, Handelswege. The little box has orders overseas. I had the good china, and I had the husband. All that was left was to keep it clean. The little box came with a 2-year warranty, longer than the span of my marriage. In times gone by, the waiter would use a small broom and dustpan. This was, for most, too cumbersome, too symbolic. God forbid a man would hold housewifery in his hands. The standard metal bars were patented before the Second World War. In 1950, Ray Machine bought a patent from a Baltimore restaurateur. And in 30 years, my mother would buy her life height from Hudson's outside Detroit. In 30 more, I would hold it here in my hands. I don't know how long I will keep its obsequious shush in my cabinet. Someone will want it, I think. A good crummer in the pocket of every good waiter. A ludicrous gadget in the sideboard of every ludicrous wife. They will endure as long as we make messes, as long as other people make messes of us. The night he proposed, I ordered the souffle at the French room. But when the server lifted the cloche, there was no souffle, just an obscenity of flowers and a tiny red box, as small, as bloody as my heart. An old married couple bought us champagne. I can't remember its taste or any. I think he asked because he thought it was time. Had some money coming in. There was no speech. There were no reasons for his love. Just my name, first, last, and middle, wrote as a phone number's drone. Between dinner and the dessert of flowers, our server scraped the table's surface, her crummer a tiny metal cog in a creaking old machine, in industry as old as I do. I drive by the Adolphus from time to time. I can see our table through the window from the street. We only got to ask for it once. At Christmas, you can see the city's glowing tree from your seat. To whomever is sitting there now, you are looking at its glint. I am looking at you, your crumbs. Let me make you, for a moment, pristine. The last poem I'll read is a kind of ekphrastic poem. 1 year later, I see the two Fridas in Dallas and think, this is the two-heartedness of divorce. There is no way in 1939 Kahlo was not thinking of before and after, the bloody sewing that must be done if one is to get away, to become another, to transcend the vestments that starch her skin, to become her own second thought. Who made these rules? There are no rules. I signed the papers this time last year. Happy anniversary. Had to read aloud, my marriage is destroyed. His hide showed up that day. That's what you've got to say, he chided. He seemed sure I wouldn't say it, that I couldn't bring myself to demolition. He snorted shade out of his nostrils. I knew that side well, but he was no bull. I slid off his back before he could fling my weight against the wall. Lucky for me, my best twin showed up that day. She don't give a shit about shame. I want more. I shouldn't have it. Or should I? There were two of him, and only one ever said yes. I took forceps and clamped the vein between the phantom I'd become and the woman still kicking my ribs inside. This time last year, I wrote, you cannot simply go on, the same woman you once were. There are, of course, other interpretations. For instance, did you know the word hostess used to mean stranger, a kind of guest at her own party? You're no longer a guest in your own body, I tell myself, a little parting gift. Thank you.
Wow. Um, there's so I made little notes while I was going, and there's so many. Like so many beautiful lines.
Thank you, Jen.
Um, the what was it? Toasts for Parlor Ghosts. I Yeah, I that blew me away, and I really loved the way that you blended the personal with pop culture, which I subscribe to your Substack pop poetry, so right, like I would expect that in your work, of course, right? Like I would expect that. Um, but it's still the seamless way that you do it is still just incredibly impressive and kind of blew me away as I was listening to you read.
Thank you so much. I sometimes I hear people, discuss the value or the fear about using pop culture, and does it date the work, and does it this and that. And I just, I find myself sort of very uninterested in that conversation, because I don't think there's any reason not to include it. I think that pop culture is culture, and I'm glad that it feels holistic the way that I use it. I feel strongly about the place that pop culture can play in our lives, and I feel that there's a real place for it in our poetry too. So I'm glad that it feels that way on the page.
Yeah, excellent. It was a joy to hear. Um, I'm gonna jump into one of our planned questions.
Okay.
What is a book or author who has created the most mayhem in your life?
That's such a great question, and I love the word mayhem because it can mean so many things. And I think what I would have to say is that the one of the very first poets I really latched onto is the poet that has caused the most mayhem for me, and that is Jim Carroll. He's, for if you don't know his work, he was a poet who was very, very active in the 1970s, and he, had a very well documented um, drug problem. He was also a rock star. He had a band called the Jim Carroll Band. If you've ever seen or heard of the film called The Basketball Diaries, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, that is based upon Jim Carroll's life. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Jim Carroll in that film. And that's based on a book called The Basketball Diaries that Carroll also wrote. He's a poet. He's also written prose, and his the early 90s collection, Fear of Dreaming, is something that I picked up at a very young age. And that was sort of my intro to contemporary poetry. And it was like the total wrong thing for like a young, really young Midwestern girl to pick up in grade school and start reading about all these drugs and sex and, death, and just really punk rock kind of lifestyle and a hard life. And that was sort of my template for a while about, for not only what poetry was, but who poets were. And I mean, there is and there isn't truth to all of that, but for a long time, I think that the kind of living on the edge part of Carol's life seemed really attractive to me. That was something that I struggled to sort of reckon with. I ended up moving to New York and living a Carol-esque, not to the drugs part of things, but I mean, I ended up going to places where he had been, and feeling like I was retracing footsteps and things like that. I got to get that out of my system in a certain sense. But I think that unless you were a white man in that period of time living in New York City, that life is just not a life that's, I don't even think Carol would want you to emulate it. He eventually, got clean and tried to counsel other people about drugs. And I think that his life was one thing that created mayhem for me, is thinking about, like, is this who poets are? And then the work was extremely, a stream of consciousness, and very strange, and very full of, like, if I get it, it doesn't matter if you get it, that kind of vibe, like a New York type vibe. And I think I wrote that way too for a long time. I think a lot of us do. I've swung, I think, pretty widely back and forth between the poles of I will reveal nothing to you to I will reveal everything to you, and finding, that neither approach really works. You have to strike a balance or work in different modes at different times. But yeah, I think that Carroll's style, his gritty realism, his subject matter, it doesn't work for everybody. It's so much a product of his time and his life, that being my entry into poetry was like scary and sexy and cool, but it was something I had to think about a lot, and try to transcend or modify, adapt into my life as a writer. It took me a long time to start reading women, for example, which is a huge loss for me. And but that's who I gravitated towards at that point in my life. And so it's caused me some mayhem, although I love the work. I still love the poems. I memorized some of the poems. So a tricky relationship with Jim Carroll. Big fan, but lots of mayhem. So it's a great question you ask, and I love the way you ask it.
I have so many questions from what you just said. I think the first question, you just mentioned that you had memorized some of his poems. Do you still have them memorized where you could recite one for us, or is that
Okay,
no pressure?
I think I can do a little ode on St. Anne's Day, which is my favorite one. Okay, let's see how I do it. You're young, and the rain just sort of remains on the branches of a tree that will someday rule the earth. And it's good that there's rain. It clears the month of your sorry rainbow expressions, and it clears the streets of the silent armies so we can dance. And I think that poem is recited partially or fully in the film. That was one of my favorite poems of his. I think I got it all. Someone can fact check me.
That sounded amazing to me. Wow, that ending.
It's a great poem. It's a great poem. Some of them are just like, I forget what the title is, but the whole poem is, I got a syringe. I use it to baste my tiny turkey. Oh, it's called Sure. It's called Sure, I think, with an ellipsis. Like, yeah, right, sure. It's a poem about doing heroin. I didn't understand. It took me years to figure out like what I was reading. It was just so subversive and so attractive to me because it seemed mysterious, not only in the way it was written and also in terms of the life it was describing. I had no fluency with that. And so poetry became associated with mystery for me too, in a way that maybe was and wasn't helpful,
How did you come across his work? From the Basketball Diaries or from something else?
It literally was just this chance thing. I was at a Borders bookstore, RIP, love Borders. I was a kid and I was just being let loose in there as my mom often did. And I just was in the poetry section looking around and I saw that book and I saw the spine and the title and I pulled it out and it just grabbed me and I pulled it out and started reading it and I couldn't stop.
Wow.
It's just a chance encounter.
That's wild. Yeah. I'm thinking about all the sort of random poetry that I ran into as a kid in bookstores and in like my uncle had a bunch of books that were just like up in a corn crib. And when he died, I kind of got them all.
Wow. That's
And
cool.
And had no idea that what I was reading was stuff that a 10-year-old has no right reading.
No business. Yeah.
Yes.
And my mom wasn't, going through it and going, what? She's like, it's poetry. Ring it up,
So was your mother supportive then of your writing and your poetry?
Oh yeah. I mean, her rule was you can't have any toy you see, but you can have as many books as you want. I will never say no to a book. And I abused that so much. I would come to her with a stack and she's like, okay, bring them up. And, she was always extremely supportive of that. And supportive of my desire to write and still is supportive of it. Absolutely. It's a big blessing in my life for sure.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'm going to try to live by her dictum with my daughter and say some toys, but any book. We'll see how it goes. See how my bank account feels after a few years of doing that.
Right. Well, you could always take her to the library and be like, you can have any book in here. We just have to bring it back.
Yes, that's what I told my husband. I said, we've got to make the library a destination. It's got to be a thing because she's gonna wear us out. If we don't have library books, we only buy her books.
Well, and you work at an arts camp, right?
I do. I work at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp.
So she's going to grow up just surrounded by so much.
I certainly hope so. I really do. I mean, I went to Blue Lake as a child, and it changed my life. And I really hope that she has that opportunity too. Right now she's got about 8 more years. Our youngest students are about 9. Though my colleague is working on day camp programs for even younger children, but I inaugurated the creative writing program here a few years ago. And so it's really exciting to see that take off. And I hope that she is surrounded by art. My husband is, a musician and I play violin. He plays trumpet. I sing. We both are just deeply invested in art. And I think it's the best thing I could possibly give to her. My husband also wants her to, do sports and stuff and great. But I mean, I'm just very very certain that there's no better education I could give her than in the arts,
Oh yeah. I very much agree.
Yeah.
Um, so what advice would you give to that younger version of yourself?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You forewarned me about that question, and I've been thinking about it, and I've had so many different answers to it. But I think what the thing I would tell my younger self is that this is going to take time, this being a writer thing, and that being a writer is not a destination. It's a life, it's a lifestyle, and you have to just live it. And I've always done that and been, I've been, there's not been periods where I stopped writing and gave up, but I think I had this idea when I was younger that because I had started writing so young, which I did, I was 12 the first time I wrote a poem seriously, and 16 the first time I had a poem published. And so I had it in my head that I was like really ahead of the game and I was going to just, rocket into superstardom, whatever the hell that is. I mean, I don't know what poetry superstardom, still doesn't get you recognized at the grocery store, right? Which is no, but I don't know what I thought, but I thought that I would, I think, publish books sooner and that I would have a different kind of success. And I didn't even have a clear idea of what success was. And it's all bullshit, is what I would tell my younger self. In that Julia Cameron, in The Artist's Way, she says something to the effect of, the reward for the creative life is the creative life. And that's it. And I totally 100% subscribe to that it's a lifestyle, and that lifestyle is its own gift. And if you're looking for some kind of object or money or prize or recognition or whatever, you may or may not get that. But what you will get if you invest in it is this wonderful life that being a creative person gives you. And I think I would also tell my younger self that, you might want to consider what it would mean to publish a book in your teens or 20s, early 20s. Like, what would you have to say? What is the sum total of your experience yet? I think it's beneficial to me in some ways that I've had to wait so long to have my first book published. I'm 38, right? Yeah, I'm 38. My first book is coming out in February. And, there have been, I've wanted to have this book out in the world for a long time. But at the same time, it's gotten better the longer I've worked on it. Become a better poet. I think that it's a blessing in some ways to really know what I have to say now and to have multiple books worth of things, in the works now. And I don't know. I think that the time I've had to develop has been a blessing. And it doesn't matter when you publish a book or if you publish a book at all. I see a lot of people wringing their hands, like in online communities, like, if I could just publish. And I'm here to tell you that I'm on the other side of it now and nothing has changed. The book isn't even out yet. Who knows what will happen from here, but it's not a destination, is what I would tell my younger self. That, you're not going to become some new kind of person when the book gets published. You have to just be in the creative life for the joy of it, for the way it helps you see the world, for the other people it brings into your life, for the pure act of creation, and that's not what a teenager wants to hear, but it's what I would tell her.
Yeah. Well, and if you got a book published as a teenager, the teenagers also don't understand that you have to, by and large, sort of bankroll your own book tour for most
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. Who's going
So
to
they
be
just
doing
don't have the
that?
money for that.
Who's doing that? You got homework to do, man. You don't have time for that. Or even, it's, I had a former student publish a book. Um, well, she must be in her very, very early 20s, and it's just a stunning achievement. And she's a stunning writer. And I don't know if what I had written at that age would have satisfied me now. But it's there's different paths for everybody. And I'm at least at the place in my life where I can bankroll my own book tour to a certain extent, which is a very nice perk.
Yeah. The benefits of the day job
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
indeed.
Yeah. What advice do you think that a younger version of yourself would give to you? What would she What would she lay down? What wisdom would she lay down for you?
That's a good one. I think she would probably encourage me. I think I'm pretty good at this, but I think sometimes I'm not. I think she would encourage me to remember the way I used to write when I was younger. You know, like I was the first person discovering something all the time. Even if I was doing something that's been done 1,000 times, it always felt for a moment like I was discovering fire while I was writing. That, it was so, I felt so intrepid. I felt like I was an explorer, and I was just so excited to try new things and to not really worry, has this been done before? Just do it, the just do it factor. I think I'm pretty good at that, but there are times where I think I could use a little dose of that boldness, a little bit of the don't worry about it, just write first and ask questions later. Um, and let writing really be your solace, and your joy. Like it's your own thing. Like this poetry thing is something that only I know about, and it's this secret fire that I have. That's how it always felt to me as a young person, even though that's completely untrue. Finding out that it's something that lots of people do is such a joy, but I think taking some of that energy from my younger self could still be helpful to me today.
Yeah, that, yeah, definitely. When you were writing when you were younger, because you said you first wrote when you were like seriously started writing when you were 12, did your friends know? And how did they like how'd that go?
No, and I would have rather died, I've talked about this before, and I probably always will, but when I first started writing poetry, I wrote it in a secret code language that, so that no one could see what I was writing. It was that I felt weird about it. I felt like I need to keep this secret and private. So I would write it even in school, I don't know. I think a lot of English majory book reading, writing types are like this, but I was just never doing what I needed to do in school. I was always secretly reading a book under my desk or secretly writing a poem or something like that. And so I was writing these poems like at school, but writing it in a secret code language. And I still have, my mom has at her house somewhere, like this stack of loose leaf paper poems in secret code language. And it's a very basic code that you could crack pretty simply, but not at first glance. It just looks insane. And I used to write that way for a long time because I just felt like that level of interiority was not suitable for public consumption. And now I'm like, here's a book that I'm putting out for everyone to read. I've come full circle now. But I used to really, I know, and I mean, even if people knew I did it, like you're writing a poem, what the poem was not open to them, and I was not interested in sharing that. And I actually had a sort of traumatic experience I've written about in my Substack at one point, where a classmate of mine took a poem that I had written in plain English and snatched it out of my hands and ran up to the front of the classroom and read it out loud to everyone, and complete with like hand gestures, and he was like acting it out and dancing, and it was just mortifying, and it sort of confirmed all of the fears I'd always had about what would happen if people knew. Because it was deeply uncool to write poetry, to have feelings, all that good stuff. But I hope that today's kids are different, that like feeling is cool. I think, from what I can tell about my like Gen Z students, they think feelings are cool. They all think poetry is cool. But I have a sample size of kids who like art. And so, it's not always perfect. But no, it was a very private thing, and I'm an only child. And so it was always just my little secret thing for a very long time.
Are you I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Uh have you ever thought of doing anything with those old secret coded poem notebooks now? Any kind of, I mean, I don't know what kind of cool project you would do with them, but like have you thought about purposing them into your current artistic practice?
That's such a great question. I'd like to see them again. It's been a hot second. I did at one point transcribe them into Word documents, and the poems themselves are very juvenile and not all that good. But I have thought a little bit about what it would be like, who the hell am I is how I feel at this stage of my life. But I have thought about what it would be like at some point to try to construct like a craft book or something, like a combination memoir craft book type thing. I have, I mean, the first poem I wrote that was serious, I was 12, but the very first poem I wrote, I have a PDF of it because it's written on construction paper because I was 4 years old. And it's a poem I wrote for my mom. Um, Roses are red, violets are blue. I love flowers with your face in it. And there's a flower with her face in it drawn on it. It's a metaphor, Jen. It's very subtle. I don't know if you picked up on it. It's extremely advanced, is what I'm saying. But I just thought, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about, how we come to poetry and all of that. And so I think there could be a place for combining these early, like apocryphal documents that I have in my writing life and thinking about how one becomes a poet or, combining that with a kind of memoiristic thing. So that is one of my back of the brain book projects that I do have, but I hadn't yet considered the secret code poem. So maybe that's a great idea for me to incorporate that too.
Well, I look forward to seeing how those come out. I also am really looking forward to Happy Everything. I've already pre-ordered it, so
Oh,
I
thank
look forward
you.
to that coming. Thank you so much for stopping by with me and chatting today.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Wow, that was so much fun. Really got me thinking. Uh, what do you think a poet is? What's the image that you have in your head of a poet? Rowdy? Rowdy out on the streets of New York? Living in a garret? Writing with a feather quill pen? I don't know. What are your images? Let me know down in the comments if you've got some thoughts on that. Thanks for stopping by.